Hello, hello, hello. Good morning here on the East Coast in the United States of America. It is now 11 a.m. here on an amazing Friday. Hello, everybody. I'm glad it's Friday. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're joining me. I'm glad I survived the US presidential debate last night. That was entirely depressing, but we're not going to talk about that. We are going to talk about AI governance today. What does it mean? What does it mean for you? What are some of the bigger questions that we need to answer? What are some of the things that we need to be talking about as an industry? I'm excited to talk about that. I'm excited to get your input because, frankly, if anybody's trying to tell you we've got this figured out, AI governance, that is, if anybody's trying to tell you we've got it figured out, we haven't. And trust me on this one, because I've been going to a lot of events recently and I've been seeing a lot of presentations related to AI governance and leaving a little unsatisfied. And that doesn't mean that I'm like, what's the right way to say it? There's a lot of work to do in the realm of AI governance. It's still early. So that's the good news. So maybe I shouldn't be overly harsh, but what I'm seeing is a lot of platitudes. What I'm seeing is a lot of same old, and it's not going to work in our world. So we're going to talk about that today. Thanks everybody for joining. Hey, where's everybody calling or logging in from? I like that. I like the roll call stuff. I like to see where people are joining from. In this venue, I see you through our video streaming platform. It's a system known as Goldcast. So I'm seeing a bunch of people here, and then there's a whole bunch of people on LinkedIn also tuning in, and I don't see that world. It's just it's a limitation of our system. So if I don't notice you on LinkedIn and you're saying, "Hey, Malcolm," and you're chatting with me on LinkedIn, I will catch up offline through the recorded version of this, and I'll say hello and I'll answer your questions. So my goal here today is to get through the content. 20 minutes. Knowing me, I'll probably go longer than that. And then I'd really like to open it up to conversation because that's the goal of this. We started CDO Matters Live as an Ask Me Anything. And we kind of evolved into more of a presentation style based on the number of inputs that we were getting through a lot of these events. It was pretty obvious to me that a lot of people were eating their lunch or doing other stuff, or maybe they were watching on YouTube or mowing their lawn and listening to this after the fact. So we kind of changed our dynamic to more of me talking at you. But if you've got questions, that's what this is all about. This isn't Ask Me Anything. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about AI governance. If you've got questions about MDM, data strategy, data quality, you name it, fair game. Anything is, I'm happy to talk about anything. Hey, Jerry from St. Louis, glad you could make it. I may be in St. Louis in August. The likelihood is high that I will be in St. Louis in August, but TBD. Jerry from St. Louis, Melanie, Bethlehem, PA. I have spent a lot of time in Bethlehem, PA, believe it or not. And in the Sands Casino, believe it or not. And that's not because I'm a degenerate gambler, which I am. It's because I used to work for a company called Dun & Bradstreet that actually had their headquarters for a long time. The headquarters are now in New Jersey, but for a long time, they had their operations out of Lehigh Valley. And their headquarters actually used to be the only tall building in Bethlehem. You know the one I'm talking about. That's where their headquarters used to be. It used to be a headquarters of an iron company. You probably know better than me, but yeah, know Bethlehem rather well. Beautiful part of the country. Love the rolling green hills there. Spain, Anna. Hi. Hi, Manmit. Coming in from not Staines Reading. Manmit joining from Reading in the UK today. Thank you. Hi. Just looking at other folks. Where are you coming from? Hello. Alan from Utah, the great state of Utah. Man, Park City is one of my favorite places. And I know that Utah is a massive state. It goes from desert to mountain. There's a lot to like about Utah. But I really like Park City. It's really, really lovely up there. I've yet to get down to the desert area, but I need to do that. Like St. George, amazingly, one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, this little desert town in southern Utah. Karen from Central Texas. I know exactly where you are in Central Texas, my old home. Lived in Texas for 20 years. I certainly miss Texas, particularly the central part of Texas. But hey, say hi as you join. Say hi wherever you're calling from, whatever. I'm a bit of a geography nut. If you asked me, like, what is my favorite book of all time, I'd probably say the Atlas. And I know that sounds weird, but I could lose myself in an atlas for days, and I don't know why. I think there's maybe a bit of a fantasy element to it, right? Like I see things and I want to go there, and I kind of maybe imagine myself there. I imagine other people there, but I've been enamored always my entire life with atlases. John Sears from South Jersey. Glad you could make it, John. Thank you. Let's talk about AI governance. Oh, hey, quick question. Kayla, is everything copacetic on the LinkedIn side? Yes, I hope so. Drop yes or no into the chat in Goldcast and let me know. I hope everything is okay on the LinkedIn side. I could start over if we had to, but probably people would get rather bored with that. Jersey, Paul Smith in Jersey, not the American one. Jersey, like Jersey, the island, like the Channel Island, Jersey. If yes, that's cool. I've yet to actually go to a Channel Island. Always been a little perplexed though by like landing in Heathrow or landing in the UK, and immigration always seeming to be different for Channel Islands. And like, what is that all about? I thought it was all part of the UK. Never quite kind of figured that out. But oh, Alexa, thank you. All good on LinkedIn. I see it. Much appreciated. Cool. All right. Yes. All right. Channel Island, Jersey. Very cool. I've heard some good things there. I'm a bit of an amateur photographer, and some of the UK-based photographers that I follow often get over to the Channel Islands. Apparently, there's one that is kind of like reminiscent of Scotland with like hills and everything. So, okay. Anyway, see, there I go. I'm opining about all the places in the world that I could go to. Glad everybody could make it. Thank you. Again, if you've got questions, let me know. Let's dive into it. If I could figure out how to share my content. Our video platform is like every week, it's a new user experience with our video platform. So if I end up sharing something that is not PowerPoint, let me know. Hopefully I'm sharing. And hopefully this is a reasonable UI. Oh, let me get rid of that. If I maximize my screen, I won't be able to see any of the chats. It's weird. How do I unpin full screen mode? Yeah, there we go. Can I make it bigger? Hopefully that's big enough. Yeah. Fun with PowerPoint. Hold on, folks. Hold on. All right. User error time. Hopefully this is enough. Hopefully the screen is good enough. We'll dive into it. And beyond, I'm going to talk through a lot of this anyway, because a lot of the people that consume this content are offline on LinkedIn or listening, that may be listening just to this recording. So I'm going to be walking through everything I'm saying. So it's not like you're going to be seeing the Mona Lisa of PowerPoint slides, because trust me, you're not. I'm horrible when it comes to PowerPoint slides. It's like stick figures. Just not that good at it. So let's talk about what is AI governance. Kayla, you can see my screen, like the whole screen. Hopefully you're just seeing PowerPoint. If you're seeing the whole screen, then there's like a fractal happening. You're seeing myself looking at myself. Oh, PowerPoint. Okay, thank you. Good. I'm having senior moments. Try to screen share here. All right, AI governance. Let's dive into it. I really see this being about two things and not three things. Really, to me, AI governance is a superset. And it's a superset that encompasses kind of two things. One is the governance of data that is used to build AI-based solutions. Okay, so we can have an academic discussion about AI governance versus AI data governance. I see AI governance being a broader set and AI data governance being a subset, superset subset. That's kind of how I look at it. AI governance is a broader wrapper that includes the data, and it also includes number two on my list here, which is the governance of the behavior of AI-based systems. Those things together, I think we can loosely just call AI governance. And drawing a distinction, AI data governance versus AI governance, AI data governance is just about data. AI governance is about data and the behavior of the models. Now, some people will say, oh, well, AI governance is also about the use of AI to automate data governance. No, I don't think so. I think that's a separate thing. At Gartner, we call that augmented data governance, right? Which is the application of AI and other advanced tools to help you automate data governance related processes. In our conversation today, we're not going to talk about augmented data governance. We're going to talk about number one and number two, and these concepts will commingle. I'm not going to, the phrase I will use today is AI governance, and just know that it could be either number one, the governance of data, or number two, the governance of the behavior of AI-based systems. All right. So hopefully we got that square. That's what I view as AI data governance. If you've got a different perspective, drop it into LinkedIn, drop it into the chat. I'd love to hear it. Now, let's talk about some of the challenges. And I mentioned this at the beginning of our session today, which I've been to a lot of industry events over the last several months, and I'm hearing a lot of people talk about AI governance. Data products, AI is still number one in terms of the things that people are talking about, but I think that AI governance is now kind of the primary focus for a lot of people. Because I think what we're seeing is the development of governance-based systems outside of the CDO organization increasingly. We can talk about that a little bit more, but this topic of AI governance is front of mind for a lot of people, and rightfully so. I'm not going to talk about why we need it. Do we really need to talk about making sure we have accurate, trustworthy, consistent data? Do we need to talk about that? I don't think we do. The value prop here, I think for most of us, is largely self-evident. So I'm not going to talk about the value prop about why it's important. I'm just going to dive into a lot of the challenges, because a lot of the things that I'm going to share with you today are not being talked about. And frankly, folks, I don't know why. Because to me, they're abundantly obvious. I actually wrote an article for Forbes recently titled "The AI Governance Elephant in the Room." It's one of the challenges that I'm going to share with you today. So to me, these are like elephants in the room. These are like giant screaming, hey, 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 look at me, look at me. And a lot of people, most are just not talking about these things. So we need to be talking about these things, these challenges. And I don't want to be downer and I don't want to be negative, but we got to figure this stuff out. So this is going to take a team effort. You, me, and everybody else that cares about governance or that manages governance, is that we got to figure it out. All right. A lot of text here. My apologies. Again, I suck at PowerPoint. And I'm going to read it off anyway, because a lot of people are listening to this content. So challenge number one, data scientists exist in a silo. Just is. Data scientists generally sit outside of traditional data management. Data scientists will go straight to raw sources of data, extract that data in their own pipelines. They call it wrangling. They will normalize, they will transform, they will do entity resolution, aka matching. They'll do whatever they need to do to that raw data in the way that they want to do it and how they want to do it using the tools they want to use. Often are Python, other custom tools, other custom solutions. But they're extracting raw data and they're working on their own, and they're being highly iterative, testing, building, testing, building, testing, to the point where 80% of the stuff that they do actually doesn't make production. But that's not a bad thing. That's just the nature of how data science works. When you're building these models, it's a highly iterative test, retest to make sure that your model aligns to reality. It's an iterative process, and often you're going to be wrong. But those folks are existing outside of the traditional data management function. That means that if you're doing data quality, if you're doing MDM, if you're building data pipelines into Azure, where that data is going into an analytics platform, maybe it's going into Snowflakes, Databricks, whatever, data scientists generally aren't using that data. So do you see a problem here? The people who are building these solutions don't actually use the data that is being produced on what I would call more traditional data management approaches. The stuff that you and I do all day, every day. That's a huge problem. We've got silos in the data science function. Number two, which is kind of an offshoot of this, and this is particularly the case for Gen AI, not all AI, but particularly Gen AI, the data used to create these solutions and optimize these solutions is unstructured data. It's text. Okay. Most of that data, unstructured data, like PDFs sitting in SharePoint somewhere, like just HTML documents just floating around on a marketing server somewhere. Like this data is all largely ungoverned today. How much governance is being applied to your marketing SharePoint server? You may have some basic access controls over that. You may have some basic archival rules. Maybe you're using some sort of digital asset management tool that does some enforcement of basic rules. But are those rules a function of, are they an output of a broader data or data governance committee? No, probably not. It's just marketing making this stuff up. And again, I'm not being negative here. It's just a reality. You've got a lot of unstructured data that is outside of how we govern data today. Okay. Huge problem. Number two. Number three, how do you quantify ethics? It's a rhetorical question because I honestly don't know. I talked with some of the smartest people on the planet on this very issue, and the answer is not entirely sure. We need to figure it out. So this isn't we're not going to talk for an hour here about how to quantify ethics, but I would argue until you can quantify ethics, how do you govern the behavior of a system? How do you build rules, conditions, math? How do you apply rules to something that is extremely difficult, maybe even impossible to fully and totally quantify? We know unethical behavior when we see it, right? We can certainly create governance committees and police after the fact when we see behaviors that we don't like. But again, if this is going to be deployed at scale, I think we need to get to the point where it's not a reactive thing. It's actually more proactive, and we're building rules to enforce ethical behavior of these systems. This is a massive, massive challenge. And what I see on the speaking circuit is people talking and putting up slides talking about, hey, our systems need to be ethical, but who can't define what that actually means. So again, this is a huge problem. Number 4 challenge, Copilot smart agents increasingly being developed outside of the data and analytics function. Right? I mean, this isn't a bad thing. I actually think this is a really good thing, kind of, in that you can now use a tool like Microsoft OpenAI Studio to build a Copilot in literally minutes. Like literally minutes. That's awesome. And that's a really good thing. It's also a bit of a challenge, AKA why we're talking about challenge. So that's challenge number 4. Number 5, this is something I think, we're not talking about this, but we need to talk about it. The behavior of AI-based systems is inherently probabilistic, right? Everything here exists in a spectrum of probabilities. It's highly contextual. Like the behavior of these systems is highly contextual. That's the beauty of a ChatGPT, is that it knows if you're talking about a bank, and it knows your context. So it knows you're probably talking about a financial institution, not something at the side of a river. That's what I mean by probabilistic. It's non-deterministic. It could be either or. Two things could be true at the same time. This concept, this idea of two things being true at the same time is a massive challenge to governance organizations because we have a hard enough time coming up with one set of rules, the one version of truth to rule them all. Now we need multiple versions of truth based on context. That's how AI works. But our minds, I would argue our mindset within the data and analytics function of most organizations just does not think that way. We tend to think deterministically. Is, isn't, on, off, yes, no. That way of thinking does not meld well in the world of AI. It just doesn't. So what that means is we need to have context-aware rules. We need to go from one set of rules to N sets of rules. Huge challenge. Lastly, I would say, arguably, the horse has left the building. And I know that sounds a little glib, but I believe it to be true. This is a speeding bullet train, and this meaning AI, and it's on the tracks and it's left the building. And we as data people are unfortunately trying to run after it with a rope in our hands. And I don't see that being a very fruitful exercise in the short term. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but we're not going to stop this. It's happening. The horse is out of the barn, and we need to be mindful of how we manage our interactions with our customers related to the governance of these systems, because we're not going to stop this train, for better or worse. There's no judgment here. It just is. So what does that mean? What are some of the key implications here? And I'm going to make a few suggestions towards the end before I kind of open up the mic to talk about stuff. But what are some of the key implications here? I've already kind of touched on a few of these, but of the 5 kind of major implications, I see number 1, and I see this a lot right now, a lot. Doubling down on same old probably isn't going to buy you much. And what do I mean? Doubling down on same old approaches to data governance will buy you something, I think, in the longer term when it comes to smart agents and chatbots. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And I believe that to be true. But in the short term, now, today, doubling down on same old, right? Doubling down on rows and columns, doubling down on legacy data pipelines that data scientists don't use, doubling down on more governance or adding things to your data catalog that are in rows or columns. In the short term, I would argue is not going to drive a ton of value. So you hear a lot of, well, we need to focus on our foundations. Focus on our foundations. Well, when it comes to AI, what does that mean? Because the foundation for AI is sitting somewhere else. It's sitting in unstructured data. It's sitting in PDF files and SharePoint servers and Word docs. And well, you get it, right? So yeah, we need to focus on foundations, but if we double down on the things that we've always been doing and how we've always been doing them, I would argue there's marginal benefit. Now, there is work afoot, and there are efforts underway to find a way to bridge the world of structured data and AI-based systems, which are running largely on unstructured, at least Gen AI systems that are running on unstructured data. And I do foresee a world where in the near future, where when you're building a Copilot, when you're using a tool like OpenAI Studio to build a Copilot, that you could just pick a structured data source as a source that is used to ground what is known as a complex RAG pattern, retrieval augmented generation, where basically you say, I want my Copilot to be bound and use this data as a fact set to inform its answers. Okay. I see that world coming. I know that there is work afoot to make that happen, but that bridge from structured data to unstructured data is a patchwork bridge at best today. Work is underway. A lot of amazing things are being done, like applying graphs, knowledge graphs to that structured data to provide context vis-a-vis the triples that are inherent to graph, right? Joe buys product, right? Malcolm lives Florida, right? That provides context, and that's way better than zero context or having to infer or imply context. So things like the application of graphs into this process, the application of vector databases as a way to store fact sets from structured data. There's work happening here, and this bridge is being built, but it's going to take some time to solidify that bridge. This is my long-winded way of saying, if we double down on same old, rows and columns, in the short term, it's not going to buy us much. Longer term, I think it will buy us more, but we need to be aware that these worlds are very different. Lots of hand moving today, folks. Wax on, wax off. So anyway, that's key constraint, implication number 1. Number 2, I would say our existing organizational structures are a little problematic. Oops, how did I fast forward this slide? Sorry. I would say our existing org structures are a little bit problematic. And I'm particularly speaking to the data science silo, right? So how do we break that silo? I don't know. I got some ideas, but it's going to take some time. Highly central. Number 3 implication here, I would argue highly centralized approaches to data governance, AI governance, highly problematic, not going to work. Getting back to this context-based world we're moving to, getting back to a probabilistic world and a probabilistic way of thinking about things. This is particularly true in data quality, by the way, where what's true or accurate to one group may not be true or accurate to another. That's how AI works, and that's largely a truth I think we've acknowledged, we've known, but we've never really kind of embraced. That what's true to marketing may be untrue to finance or vice versa. But taking a highly rigid approach to that, one size fits all, not going to work. Highly centralized, not going to work. Not going to work. Doesn't mean we totally blow up centralized models, by the way. It means we have both. We have centralized, we have decentralized. It's not an either or, it's a both. This is the world we are living in now, thanks to AI. It's not an either or, it's a both, and it's just probabilities. Maybe it's probably this, could be probably that. Depends on the context. Number 4, our existing mindsets, I would argue, are highly problematic. I talk about this at length. I'm writing a book on this. We need to think differently, folks. We just need to think differently. This idea, like we throw around the concept of garbage in, garbage out, like rice at a wedding. We just throw it out all the time. And while as a kind of a pithy marketing slogan, or as a rallying cry, perhaps, that's how I kind of see it more often used, as a rallying cry. Let's get better data. Well, who's going to argue with that? But as a rallying cry, okay, fine. But I think it actually does more harm than good in the long run, because what is garbage to one may be gold to another. And we've always acknowledged this. We've always we should have always acknowledged this. We haven't, I would argue. But I think deep down, we've always kind of known it, right? What may be good enough for an operational use case, that customer record sitting in your CRM may be good enough to send an invoice, to recognize revenue, to book a deal. But maybe when it comes to using that data in an analytics use case, where you're trying to aggregate cross-functionally across a marketing function, across a finance function, maybe it's not good enough. We say that's garbage. But it could be, that data could be totally good enough for an operational use case, but we still label it as garbage. I think that's highly problematic. But again, this gets back to this idea of yes or no, deterministic ways of thinking. It is or it isn't. It doesn't fly in an AI world. It just doesn't, because that's not how these systems work. Number 5, the use of what I would just loosely call heavy-handed tactics to try to pull the horse back into the barn. Not going to work. That horse is gone. It's out. We will not be able to control it. And if we come in top down and say that, you need to do this, or we're going to shut down everything. I mean, some companies tried that coming into early 2023 when they didn't know how to deal with ChatGPT. A lot of them just said, okay, we're just shutting it down. No LLMs at all. I just think approaches like that in the long run will not work. So we have these constraints, or we have these challenges, I would argue we need to overcome. We have some of these key constraints, right, that limit our ability to address the challenges. When you put them together, where does that leave us? What should we do? I will acknowledge I don't have answers here. I don't. And anybody that tells you they have all the answers for what we need to do from an AI governance perspective, red flag, because we don't. This is evolving. So I will give us a little grace here. I'll give us a little patience as an industry, because it's going to take some time to figure this out. It took us a year. It took us a year to figure out, the data being used for LLMs is not the data sitting in our Snowflake databases usually, right? Like, it took us a year to figure that out, right? For a year, I heard people saying, well, I can't use my data to train an LLM. Well, how many of you are actually training LLMs? I bet like nobody right now listening to this or downloading this or doing it is actually training an LLM. Because why would you need to? Right? I mean, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars to do it. And where we are now is largely commoditized, I would argue. You can go download from Hugging Face one of 1,600 different language models. But I heard for a year, oh, well, we can't use our data to train a language model. Well, you don't have to. But it took us a year to come to that awareness and that knowledge. So it may take us a year to figure out that AI governance is inherently different than legacy governance to a certain degree, based on all the things that I've been sharing, particularly from a mindset perspective. So I will give us some grace here that it's going to take some time to figure this out. But I don't have any magic answers. This is what I'm sharing with you today is a partially formed perspective. And I really welcome the conversation here about how to get all this stuff figured out. What should we do? Well, one thing I know for sure is that working in very siloed ways and huddling in our data and analytics function isn't going to cut it. We need to start being proactive. We need to start building relationships with people across the business if we don't already have them. We need to figure out who's using these things. We need to figure out which groups in our organization are embracing AI. We need to be proactive and go out. Venture forth, data professionals, venture forth. Go out there, figure out what's going on. What does your marketing leader think about AI? What does your procurement leader think about AI? Are they thinking about implementing or using some sort of co-pilots? Maybe they already are. Maybe they've turned them on within one of your functions. Get out there, have conversations about AI. Get out there, have conversations about the data within your organization. Start talking if you're not already talking. That's basic, right? That's basic. I would largely kind of lump that into let's take more of a product management approach to data and analytics, including governance, by the way. Let's look at ourselves as enablers and not controllers. I think that's important. That gets back to that mindset shift that I've been talking about. So get out there, venture forth, start figuring out what people are doing. What are they talking about? What are the sentiments within your organization about AI? What are the sentiments about the data and analytics function? How happy are people with the solutions you're providing, and how can you improve those, particularly when it comes to AI? Start asking people, what are your requirements for AI? What do you see in the next 6 months, VP of procurement or director of procurement or manager of procurement? Go into the lunchroom, have conversations with people from groups outside of yours. Talk about AI. I bet you'd be amazed with the stuff that you're hearing. We do need to, number two, we do need to start thinking about new ways to structure and manage the data science function. This is a tough one because as much as we are kind of cousins, and maybe even closer than cousins, maybe we're siblings, and the we being kind of traditional data management and data science. I mean, we're both managing data. We're both manipulating data. We're both trying to extract insights from data. We're both trying to drive value from data. So maybe a sibling is a better metaphor here. So as much as we are siblings, how we work is very different. It's very different. So how do you take kind of a best of breed approach where you pull a data science function in closer to the core data and analytics functions, to the governance functions, to the data management functions like data quality and MDM and integration analytics? How do you pull them into that and still give them the freedom they need to be highly iterative, to do a lot of experimenting with data? How do you enable them from a tools perspective, a technology perspective? These are all really important questions that I don't have all the answers to yet, but we need to get that data science function closer, so that if we do have a data set that can be reused across multiple use cases, whether that is an analytics, classic analytics use case, a data science use case, any other use case, if we can reuse data, we really need to be doing it. There's a lot of work to be done here. I'm excited about some of the things I've seen with Microsoft Fabric and other Fabric related initiatives and some of the data providers out there, including Snowflake and Databricks. I'm excited about, these hyper virtualized layer to allow you to access data anywhere and have it live in a kind of a standard normalized format in the case of Microsoft Delta Parquet. So I'm excited about some of that stuff, but we are in very, very early stages here. As a data scientist, you need visibility on everything that is being done to data, right? If you are on the hook to build a custom model, the thing you need the most is to be able to explain why the model works the way it does. And if you're using data that has been transformed in some way, maybe matched in some way, something done to munged, wrangled somehow, and you don't know what it was done to the data, that will have major implications on the performance of your model. So we, on the classic data management side, need to have tools to give data scientists insight into what is being done and when and how and by whom and in what conditions, what it was before and what it was after. if we're matching data in an MDM system and we want the data scientists to use our master data products, well, we need to be able to explain to that data scientist exactly why they're looking at what they're looking at, how it got to that state. Until we can get to that point and provide them that visibility, I'm thinking number 2 here, meaning pulling data science and data management functions closer. Till we can get to that point, it's going to be a challenge. So there's a lot of work here, folks. There's a lot of work, particularly for my CDO friends. How do we figure out how to pull this together? And this isn't just about technology, but technology is a component for sure. Number 3, boy, we need to get our hands around unstructured data ASAP. 5-alarm fire, whoop, whoop, whoop. We need to get our hands around unstructured data. And I know that's a loose, kind of pithy catch-all, and there's a lot of work here, but we need to get our hands around it. I think it starts with visibility. So I'm not out here to sell data catalogs, but from a technology perspective, that'd be a good starting point, I think. Just knowing what's out there, just get an inventory. Like, what is out there, right? Is it publicly exposed, right? Had Air Canada done this, maybe they wouldn't have had to go to court about an incorrect bereavement policy shared via one of their chatbots, because apparently that's what it was, is some old data lingering around in a marketing server somewhere that got exposed publicly that was incorrect. So there's a lot of work around unstructured data, a lot of work around unstructured data. Number 4, we need to find a way to build better bridges into the, let's just loosely call them the domains. I don't like that word per se, but it works for now. So the domains. I came up with this idea maybe about even a year ago now of something I called an AI ambassador. I don't know. This could be an analyst. This could be a data product manager. I don't know, but we need to find a way to be solution driven around AI and basically have salespeople. I'll loosely call them salespeople within the business functions, where they're not just sales, they're analysts. They're deeply understanding business processes. They're understanding how that division wants to leverage AI or maybe not leverage AI. But they're working day in and day out. They're coming up. You're working with them to develop maybe models, to develop solutions. I think some of these roles kind of already exist, but not much. And maybe AI ambassador is too pithy and too silly of a, I don't know. But you get my idea. Like a product manager. That's what a product manager does. So I love, maybe call it an AI ambassador. Maybe it's an AI product manager, but I love that idea of getting people into specific business functions to figure out what's going on and what do our customers need and want. And that person could be also responsible for classic data and analytics, by the way. It doesn't have to just be AI. Lastly, number 5, we really need to change the way we think about data and analytics and data governance. We need to think about governance as an enablement function, not a control function. Now, I think you could argue that enabling the business is a function of control. Maybe we're getting into some semantic hair splitty enterprises here, but we do need to think differently. The world we live in is not deterministic. It is probabilistic. What is garbage to one is gold to another. Data quality is an opportunity, not a burden. I could go on here, folks, but do you see where I'm coming from? We need to start thinking differently about how we approach our work and how we approach our data and how we approach our customers. I use that word consciously, customers. So these are just 5 ideas that I had. Doesn't mean I'm right. Doesn't mean there aren't more. There are probably a lot more. Well, I know there's a lot more because this is evolving. This is kind of a moving target. We got to figure this out together. In our final 20 minutes, and maybe there's no answers. Maybe we don't want to talk about it. Maybe we want to talk about other stuff, and that's cool too. But what do you think? I mean, based on what I shared, right, on any aspect of what I shared, some of the key challenges, maybe you disagree with some of the challenges that I asserted. Maybe you work for a company where the data science team is deeply aligned to the traditional data and analytics function. Maybe your data scientists are using, your master data products. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you've got your hands around already unstructured data, and you know what every file is on every SharePoint server, and whether it's publicly available or not, and what the content is and what the metadata is associated. Maybe you've found a way to take things like video files, even including video, by the way, things like video files, and extract metadata from them to understand what the content is and what it's about and who created it and under what conditions and on and on. Maybe you've done that. I'd love to hear it if you have. So, chat. Hey, Tom from Southern California. Glad you could make it. Daniel, I'm glad you overcame some of your technical issues. I don't see a ton of messages. Who's on, though? Hi, Sarab. Daniel. Hi, Susan. Hi, Sue. Hello. Pernod Ricard. Pernod, that's the liquor, right? Pernod Ricard. Paul from Aztec Group. Hi, Paul. Roberto, glad you could make it. Hi, Cold Glass. Hope everything in the ATX is going swimmingly today. I already said hi to Carmen. Amber Jewett, hello. Glad you could make it. Any questions, guys? I mean, I shared a lot. I shared a lot. And I consciously, usually I will just keep ranting, but I consciously saved some time to talk about this stuff. So Geert has a question. What are the characteristics of an enabling data governance function? Well, I think it touches a lot of the things that I was just talking about. One would be a very, very different mindset, right? One anchored on customer success and not control of data, right? Like that, to me, that is like, if we could do that, if we could have a governance function where the number one key metric, if there was only one, there should be multiple metrics, but if the number one key metric was customer success versus what I would argue most metrics today are related to control, right? I think that's a good starting point. There's a lot of other aspects here, though, as well, right? So another aspect of governance as an enabler would be, I kind of hate to use this term, but we can use it for now, and hopefully it evolves and becomes something else, because there's way too many something ops. But let's just loosely call it governance ops, shall we? What does that mean? Well, where governance is deeply embedded into how the business performs and how the business operates. Be a little more digital native. I'll give you an example, right? Instead of governance being this separate thing that is thought of after the fact, right, which is generally what we do, people on the business side will create an application, they'll create a business process, they'll do something. The governance, the data kind of flows over the wall, lands on our deck, and then we need to figure out how to govern it and what to do with it. Can you have a world instead where those governance rules, the governance policies are inherent to how that business gets architected? That business process gets architected, right? That's what I would loosely kind of call governance ops. And it's how many digital natives actually work. A lot of companies get by just fine without governance because they consider these things when they architect a business process or when they build a software application to help automate that business process, like a CRM tool or an ERP tool or any other tool on the business side. Procure to pay, doesn't matter. Where governance is kind of inherent to how people work, right? So not an afterthought. It's part of baking the business cake. So that's another attribute of governance as an enabling function. I would argue another attribute is where you have people that are more product driven. You could call them product managers responsible for governance functions. Another aspect of governance as an enabling function is where we jettison old labels and old approaches that we know don't work very well. I'll give you an example. Data owner. Okay. For the data that matters most in your organization, right? The 20% of the data that is driving 80% of the business value, customers, employees, assets, locations, things, people, materials, suppliers, I could go on. That data, the idea of there being any one owner to that data, it just doesn't pass the smell test. It doesn't. Data governance is a team sport. And when it comes to building rules to define how that data is managed / governed, right? The policies that define its acceptable use, the policies that define how the business uses that data to extract value, those are done in collaboration. The idea of one person owning that, I think is again, this idea of control. I control. I don't enable. I control because I own. Man, I've learned the hard way. I've been assigned data ownership roles, and I've gone into offices of chief revenue officers and told them that I own their data. Right? I didn't know much better as a young data and analytics professional, but that was a short conversation, and I didn't have a lot of fun. Hi, I own your data. No, you don't. When it comes to all the data, the 20% of the data that's driving 80% of the value for your organization, it is a team sport. And the idea of any one person owning it, sheesh, that's tough. So I could keep going, but hopefully you get my point. Thanks for asking the question, Geert. Paul, in terms of Profisee and matching, is anyone using LLMs to assist in any way? The concept of applying just now as a context is incredibly abstract to me. Yeah. When it comes to matching, I would argue that we need to think differently. Matching has largely always worked the same for the last 20 years. I would argue, and anybody tell me I'm full of it, but I mean, the algorithms here are well known, well published, well used, right? They're all kind of distance algorithms, like the, Levenstein distance and the Jarrow-Winkler distance and SoundX and PhoneX, and like they're all largely been the same. To become more context driven, I would argue you need to overlay things like knowledge graphs on top of that process, right? Where you have additional context that would allow you to configure match rules based on the context of the data. If you knew that this was a customer record and the context for this record was simply marketing, right? The answer to an entity resolution challenge could be potentially different than it was if the context was finance. Think of this in a 3-layer cake. Bottom layer is function, sales, marketing, HR. Maybe you could call it a domain. That's fine. Middle layer, cross-functional. Top layer, enterprise-wide. Think about context that way. 3 levels of context. And the answer that you get at each could be different. So hopefully that's a little less abstract. But what I'm trying to get to here, Paul, is the idea that in the case of matching, in the case of MDM, the idea, the concept of truth is contextually bound. But within any one context, there's still a single version of the truth. So at that top level, there's one version of truth. At the middle layer, there's one version. And at the bottom, there's another version. And they can be slightly different. That's our challenge. Because today, what we're saying is there's just one level. One rule to rule them all. One version of truth, hard stop, to rule them all. Works great for the CFO, the CEO, the CIO. Works great for them up there, but works less great for people at the bottom. How often have you heard, if you're involved in MDM, you've probably heard people say, in marketing, it doesn't work for me. We're out. Like how you've defined customer A probably as a bill to, and I really care more about ship to, or whoever actually gets the goodies, who's benefiting from the goodies versus who's paying for the goodies. 2 different contexts. And you could and should, I would argue, we need to adapt to a future where we can have different answers to the same question based on the context of where the data came from and where the data is being used. That's going to be a challenge. Hopefully that makes sense, Paul. Jacob. Oh, and thank you for these questions, by the way. These are wonderful. Jacob, if organizations aren't using data in their EDW, Snowflake, Databricks, etc., for training LLMs, then what data are they using? Well, LLMs are being trained. Most of the large language models, like the ones that we all know and love, they're being trained on internet data. like 70 billion parameters, right? But these models are being trained to mimic human language and mimic all human knowledge. Where we're going is these LLMs will become SLMs, small language models, where we will build language models in the language of business. So you will have maybe a lawyer language model and maybe an accountant language model, but they're still not going to be using data out of Snowflake and Databricks to do it. They're going to be using data that is unstructured and that is very text centric, but because these systems have been created to, in essence, read, right? But we can get into tokenization, we can get into other things, but they're reading and they're digesting what they're reading. You can't read a row and column. Well, I mean, yeah, you can, but you get my point. It's not the same type of reading, right? I could read a field of data, but that's not the reading I'm talking about. I'm talking about understanding context, being able to read a sentence. Malcolm lives in Florida, but moved recently from Texas, right? Like, imagine just that one sentence. Like the data architecture needed to support that one sentence, and the number of joins, right, needed to do it, right? Like these systems work entirely differently. They're using text data to create systems that can mimic how people think and speak. They're not using rows and columns. Now, what we can do with the rows and columns is use that data in a prompt to what's called ground a prompt. This is what's known as a RAG pattern, retrieval augmented generative pattern, where the LLM, as a part of the prompt in the prompting process, will go out to a third, just an external system or external database, like a vector database or a graph database, or even a website. I mean, maybe you've used a website and maybe you've used an LLM to say, hey, using this website as a source of truth, tell me what you think about it, right? That's basically what we're talking about. So the model, the language model is largely set, right? ChatGPT. The P stands for pre-trained. We're not training ChatGPT. We're not training. It's already trained. It's pre-trained. But what we can do within our companies is find a way to get the rows and columns into some sort of RAG pattern that can be used to ground the behavior of an LLM, where we could say, if we take this as truth, if we know this to be true, if this is a constraint, use this as your source of data and your source of truth, then analyze the data for me. Tell me something about my customers. Tell me who the most profitable customer is. That's the world that we need to get to, and it's going to take some time to get there. Great question, Jacob. Thank you. Any other questions? Those were good ones. Oh, glad you could make it. Stuart Knight. Brandon, what's up? Rajiv, hello. Hi, Sarah Brewer. Hello, Susan Levine. Glad you could come. Looking forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. David Sochin, so glad you could make it. I think I'm up to date. Gustavo, hello. Glad you could make it. Hi, Lori. Glad you could make it. Anna, glad you could make it. Miguel, I got to work on my Spanish. Man, I am not very good at Spanish. Growing up in Canada, we learned French. That was our second language, and I'm not good at that either. Hi, Cindy from Wisconsin Department of Employee Trust Funds. Did I not meet you at an event recently? I think so. Forgive me if I forget. Hello, Jennifer. Oh, great. So many people out today. This is awesome. We've got 6 minutes, folks. What do you want to know? What do you want to ask me? Oh, thank you, Kayla. Marcos says, I believe that in order to govern with the purpose of enabling, sorry, my UI here is a little wonky, of enabling opportunities, the data governance team must work as an independent team in the organization. From my experience, data governance teams are almost always under IT structure and thus far too filtered from the organization overall strategies. Yeah, I agree with you, but it's not an either or, it's both. Meaning you need to have governance functions within the domains, call them within business functions. Yep, for sure. Totally agree with you there. You need to get really close to the business. You need to understand business processes intimately, but there is still a role for some sort of centralized IT driven, arguably, governance function. Now, again, remember that pyramid. Enterprise-wide, cross-functional, functional. Having governance at a functional level is important. This is the idea of a mesh, shall we say. This is the idea of a mesh. Decentralization, local control of governance, local control of analytics, local control. Hey, these are good things. That's cool. But we cannot forget that there are cross functions here. Quote to cash, procure to pay. You do a contract in Salesforce, it needs to flow to your ERP system. There needs to be governance to enable that. I would argue the mesh does not do nearly a good of a job as it needs to define how that would actually work. I would argue, in fact, that it doesn't define how that works. But middle layer of the pyramid, cross-functional governance, enterprise-wide governance, all three need to be supportive. So I do agree with you that, we need to be business-centric. So totally agree with you. Amber, appreciate the comment. Data quality is an opportunity for a business, not a burden. That's where we need to get. That's it. That's how we need to think. Like, not that, oh, well, those people in sales are making my life hard. And guys, I thought this way for a long, long time. Like I've managed a 1,400 seat implementation of Salesforce, the data sitting in it. And it was just like every time I logged, I was just like, oh my God, my head would spin. But they're doing their best. This is another thing we need to do. We need to think positive intent. They're doing their best. Everybody's doing their best. Everybody's doing their best within the constraints that they're given, the resources that they're given, and the incentives that they're given for their job. So I'm glad that it resonated, Amber. Looking through comments. I've got like this little wee tiny window for comments. Maybe I could resize it. I don't know. Maybe beyond my technical wherewithal. Jacob, could you talk through an MDM strategy that might tie into how a company uses a Gen AI tool like M365 Copilot as an example? Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We do, don't get me wrong. We do need to do better at foundational data governance, right? We need to do better at governing data we have in rows and columns, right? We need to do better with that. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying the applicability of that data today is limited. And what I mean by that data, rows and columns. And I'm saying rows and columns. What I'm just saying is structured data, right? Data sitting in AWS, in GCP, and Azure that is part of our scope of governance today. We do need to do better because there will be a time, and it is fast approaching, where as a part of building a Copilot on the fly, you can pick one of those structured data sets as a way to ground the response of an LLM. They're not there today, as far as I know. The last time I looked and played around with OpenAI Studio, I can do like Azure Blob storage. I can even point an LLM at a SharePoint server, and there's other things that I can do, but I can't really point it at rows and columns. But that day is coming. So I think there is a story to be told about getting our house in order, but there's a whole other house out there, and we don't even go to it. We it's off in the distance. It's that unstructured data house. It's the data science house. It's sitting over there, and we know it's there. But how do we pull that closer? That's going to be a challenge. Mahendra, with Copilot from MSCS, could put their internal company's data into a private Copilot LLM, and then Copilot asks a question. Why have an MDM? Ooh, what a really good question. And frankly, Mahendra, I'm thinking a lot about this. And in this kind of highly AI-enabled, this augmented world, what will the role of MDM be in the future? Oh, thanks for sharing that, Kayla. That's a lot. Why have an MDM now? Well, because I think MDM is going to enable us to get to that point of context awareness and context centricity, right? There will need to be multiple rules applied to data. There will need to be visibility in those rules. There will need to be configurability in those rules. There will need to be auditability in those rules, right? So in the short term, and I would say argue for at least the next 10 years, humans will drive governance policies and processes. I know I've said on LinkedIn that we're going to automate one day, and I actually do believe we're going to automate, but in the short term, humans are going to be making decisions about all things relevant for how we define customers, what we care about customers, right? All the various governance related aspects, particularly those that are managed within MDM. How do we manage relationship between customers, for example, will be human managed, human governed, where the rules need to be managed in a system like an MDM. Will we get in another 10 years where those rules become automated by AI? In 10 years, maybe, but in the short term, we need MDM more than we ever have before. And I've got a lot of presentations on this. Guys, it's the top of the hour. It's noon. Thank you so much for joining today. I hope you got value out of this conversation. There's a lot of work here. There's a lot more we need to figure out as a team. And if you had a question that wasn't answered today, please reach out on LinkedIn. Please continue to come to these events. Subscribe to the CDO Matters podcast through your podcast provider. Join this growing community. I'm excited you were here today. Thanks. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you all on another CDO Matters Live sometime really soon. Thanks all. Bye for now.